Being totally politically incorrect, it sounds like every one of your problem is from very rich, spoiled people, and perhaps a national surcharge on the persons who are coming to climb your camps, climb your mountains and leave their trash, going up to the Alaska wilderness. Some of you have to start by getting some management infrastructure. If you have no infrastructure, there's no place to start.
So just one thing I noticed with a bunch of you guys is that you've got a whole lot of guide companies coming in and concessionaires, and I don't claim to know much about any of your specific situations, but it sounds like the folks from Aconcagua have been working with the guides to get some help, and I know that it seems to have worked in Nepal, and I know at the canyon, without the support of our guides, both on the river and in the backcountry, a lot of our management stuff wouldn't fly. And so, one thing that seems like it would apply to several of you is if you can figure out how to harness, like through a guide association or through a certification process for the guiding community, to get them behind you and to start working with them as an alliance with them, especially for those that don't have the infrastructure to enforce laws. If you can get that to be a peer-related thing, I think you might have some luck with that.
In general, in Patagonian area, although there are guides working, there are not even the 5% of people who is arriving to the area. So we are very close working with them. They are helping us to let us know what's going on in the mountains. Sometimes we are not able to be there all the time. But the thing is that there is a very, very few people that is going up with those climbing guides. So they are not able to do anything but asking the other guys who are walking by their own about the problems, issues that we are, and letting them know the issues, and of course asking them to make them better, So though we are working with them, it's very difficult to try to solve the problem just with working with them, Very important people who is helping us is the concessionaires of the climbing huts. Those guys, they usually receive the whole amount of people who is walking, not only with guides, but their own. The thing is that, once again, they do their best, but they are not able to enforce in any way. So the lack of presence of the National Park Service in the trails is a very important issue.
The point that I was going to make that I saw that could happen, and you're doing this in most of the areas, is an expansion of the volunteer program that you do have right now. So like Bernard, you've got a volunteer program that you've got going. Do you have a person that's hired to deal with the volunteers on yours?
No, we do not have a structured system of dealing with volunteers. We occasionally call upon the communities in town, the schools, the colleges around. We go and invite them to come over and do the cleanup, but it's not structured in any way. Only when we find the problem, there's too much problem, that's when we go down there and ask whether they can make arrangements on how we can transport them up there and clean up and then take them back. So it is not there.
Right.
Yeah.
I think each area could be addressed differently. What I saw, like for the Arctic Refuge, I know in our country we got a zillion people that are getting toward retirement right now that would love to be out in those places, and you could have so many people helping out there. And essentially, I thought just meeting folks before they departed, somehow find a way that they could be at these main exit departure points, and like a campground host, but it'd be volunteers that would have no problem finding volunteers that spend their summers out in these areas, meeting with folks and doing a short orientation, making sure they're going to do the right thing. I don't know if that's feasible or not, but those folks would probably pay everything of their expenses even to stay there. And all you'd have to do is probably not provide them anything other than support. I mean, as far as maybe educational materials or whatever. But yeah.
We have tapped into that as much as we can, but one of the issues is that the type of people that visit Arctic Refuge are very different than the type of people who would be willing to volunteer and kind of live in a gateway community and share information. And the people that come to visit don't think they can learn anything from, someone who's living in an RV. They're pretty high capacity, high level experienced users. The other aspect of that that's a little complicated is that we still have a management regime or a perspective that we don't want to interface with the visitors. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with this, but that we're taking something away from their experience. We're taking something away from their pure wilderness opportunity for experiential freedom by having an interaction with them. I don't know what the right answer is. I think it's interesting that I've only been at the refuge for 7 years, and most of our staff has been there for 15 or 20 years. So the perspectives on how we should be managing and what we should be providing for people are so dramatically different than some of the ideas that you guys might present. I want to hear them, but I don't know how much we can tap into volunteers for that specific need. Or how we would go about doing it.
I think in all these cases, they're at different stages. But like at Denali, like in our mountaineering program, we couldn't do anything without the volunteers in the end. It took figuring this all out. I mean, we've been at the volunteer program for 35 years. It probably took the first 10 years to kind of get it going. But now we have just one of our staff that, actually all of our staff deal with them, but one does it more than the others. And it's just a periphery part of their job. And but they come and they go, and we just constantly cycle volunteers. They're essentially climbing rangers, but Denali Park's got a lot of, the main park areas, Jen, it's got a lot of volunteers. And I look at it as being a huge plus, because if you can get people of say, from Argentina or Chile that are, they'll take more pride into it if they're volunteering from those local areas. And then they go back and educate the people about what they've learned as volunteering. And it's a win-win situation all the way around.
So we have in Chile, in Torres del Paine, we have some programs. We work very together with the local guides community and with the climbers too. And we give some programs in some schools and go 2 times a year to the backcountry before the high season and at the end of the season to clean all the free camping sites. So we are working together, and the system works pretty good. So I realized that maybe we have to raise the level, to the second stage, maybe another levels as more support of the government or another international agency to make more this bigger, because we are working very well, but at the local level, though. We need more help.
I try to emphasize my presentation in the problems that we got. I did mention some good things that we are going on. And in fact, we've been doing a volunteer program for more than 20 years. I was a volunteer myself before I became a ranger. And without volunteers in our area, it would have been impossible to take care of the situation, at least the way we are taking care right now. These guys usually are coming from Argentina. We have some international volunteers also. And they make us possible to have some presence in the area while people is arriving, and also to be patrolling a little bit, because usually our areas, they have a lot of use in front country, and from there, they are the trailheads of the backcountry activities. So it's impossible to be in both areas at the same time. Usually volunteers take care of attending the people in their most used areas, and once in a while, they go back to the backcountry. And rangers, we are patrolling front country and try to get at least 3 times a week in the backcountry to have some presence in there. Once again, the lack of personnel is our biggest issue.
With regard to Arctic Refuge, I mean, it's not that our volunteers aren't incredibly valued by us and useful, but it gets back to that issue of you don't really have a carrot to give them. Like with you, I mean, I think, gosh, I could model the climbing ranger volunteer program and whatnot, but they get to go climbing on the mountain, you know? And at Arctic, I have worked there for 7 years and I floated 3 of the rivers. I mean, I get out on the refuge every summer, but it's a very rare opportunity. We have a field program that's very focused around our biology, but in terms of monitoring recreation and in terms of patrolling visitors, there's no carrot. It's not like if you come and live in Coldfoot in an RV for, Coldfoot is like the farthest north truck stop in the universe. So, you know, it's not like if you come and live in Coldfoot for a month, then you can, you know, go and float some cool refuge river. It's like, just come and live in Coldfoot for a month. Thanks.
One of my thoughts,
You know.
Jen, was to have I know the refuge a bit, but have the volunteer at the fly-in location. And then at the end of their stint, they'd do the same trip that they were talking to everybody about. So that would be the carrot.
The volunteers that we normally engage, they normally come and collect the solid waste along the trails and at the camps, and then carry the whatever, the plastics and the polythene paper bags back with them. But the problem of the human waste along the trails, it's like they don't want to touch it. It's a stigma to them. They go avoiding it, those tissues they don't. And then the issue of the pits filling up, you know, they can't address that. You know, we are still left with that problem with us. Actually, the solid waste can be managed. Even it is easy. We are able to manage that. But these are the problems. The human waste is the issue.
You've all talked about the difficulty of shipping either product or solutions to your locations, and I just wondered what you thought of Eric's presentation from Mount Shasta, and that he had local people creating a solution that would then be shared with visiting climbers. Is that something that might, and I think just starting off small with taking one particular trail possibly and looking at a distribution point and a collection point and just demonstrating success before you try to implement it for the Torres del Paine or you know, one of the other parks. Just one small success, and then you can build that into a. But did it seem like that? You know, giving a business opportunity or to a local community or a group, is that something that sounded interesting to you?
Yeah, sure. I really like the presentation from Eric, and I give brought with me some ideas, new ideas to develop when I go back to Torres del Paine. Yes, and I'm sure that one of the good ones is from Eric's presentation. Yes.
In the case of Argentina, we have a lot of research centers and School of Engineers. So our idea when we go back is to try to show all these technologies are available. Let's see how what we can implement here. If we can do like a pilot test in one campsite, especially for example in Confluencia, as Seba showed that we have a big problem there, and the temperatures are a little bit higher than in the high altitude, and see if we can implement some of the systems. So I think in Argentina, at least, there are the human resources and the knowledge, but maybe as recreation is not as important maybe as in the States, as we have seen in the figures yesterday, so many people go, they haven't raised that issues yet, but I think we can definitely bring this knowledge and try to develop the technologies in our country.
In the villages of Arctic Village and Kaktovik, there are very different economic structures. Arctic Village has been somewhat receptive to the idea of partnering with us and potentially us putting in some type of infrastructure for waste disposal, and then them being able to use that as a means of revenue, charging per deposit or something like that. They're pretty impoverished and would like the opportunities for different economics opportunities to come in. But Kaktovik is part of the North Slope Borough of Alaska, which, and each of the residents of the North Slope Borough get a pretty extensive dividend from oil and gas development. So the desire to get additional revenue is not there. There's no incentive or motivation. And in both villages, there's a wide range of perceptions, but in both villages, there's a general underlying current that, you know, they really would pretty much rather the visitors all go away. This is their subsistence land, and this is where they've had seasonally nomadic lifestyles for thousands of years, and they just really don't want them or any of their problems, you know, having to do with their villages. So, you know, especially when you're talking about human waste, then it becomes even more complicated. But there is some possibility there, and I continue to hope that that's going to evolve.
When I made a presentation, I tried to present these 4 different points of view of the issues, because I think that you cannot solve the problem just aiming from one direction. If we talk about the technology, I put it in the 4th place because I think it's the least important. I think that public consciousness is our main problem. If we can change the mentality of the people who go to the mountain, the technology, it's going to be there. That's not the problem. I think Eric's solutions became perfectly usable because there was public awareness about the problem. There was the regulations, or at least the management intent to solve the problem. The cost, as he said, was so minimal, so they were able to make this thing go. The problem that we got is not that we do not have the technology right there, because, as I said, this is going to be something that showed up whenever we realize that as a society we have this problem, we have to solve it, we have to work in it, we, the managers, we have to change our mentality and realize that this is a real issue that we are having right now. Though you are not walking in Patagonia kicking these pieces of, what was they naming, brown worms yesterday, that's not the situation, you know. That's not happening right now. The things that maybe in the future it will happen. So we are right now in a position that if we grow as a society, taking this issue as a real problem, we're going to be able to solve it. And right now, in the point that we are, although anybody came with me with a box full of bags to go out and to put on them and to bring them back, if we do not change our society, we are not going to be able to solve anything with those. That's the problem. So we have to, at least what we thought, is that we have to aim to the issue from 4 different points to be able to create a solution that is sustainable in the time.
In Mount Kenya, we never used to have a management plan. We are finalizing one. Now, all the hiking routes I talked about, the 6 of them, they have not been mapped out, and they do not have those facilities there. They are not there. And the ones which have them, there are very few of them. Now, the backup strategy, the method of carrying the human waste back is a new concept. It has never been tried there. I really don't know if I was to introduce those bags, how the communities or the visitors or the porters will take it. Because, as I said earlier, it's a stigma to deal with the human waste. In some of the societies there, I know, some of the communities I know in our country, it's a taboo to even to share one flush toilet with your family members. So it's a good idea, yes, but it may take some time for it to be accepted by the communities there. So before we get to that level, I am really wondering, do I do the toilet, the kind of compost toilet, or do I, how do I handle that waste? I don't know the best method now to do, because when I listened to Gary yesterday, before Gary presented, I thought I had a solution, but when he presented, I got confused now. Do I go? If he's destroying the toilets now, then I don't have to construct them. You know? So anyway, maybe I will seek for advice in that particular area from you, and see which is the best way forward in this.
I wanted to just explore a little bit about maybe closing the loop that you've touched on a little bit between the visitors to the Arctic Refuge who seem to have, you said sort of a higher level of experience, revering the majesty of the refuge. Seems like they have the funds, they're a certain level of wealth. So some of these river corridors are more popular. So what I'm exploring here is the idea of packing out and some kind of system that you could get buy-in by the pilot. So a containment system, perhaps. You said that sign that, the pilots didn't want, and maybe some of the earlier days of the Clean Mountain Can, you experienced some of that, but developed a system where it is contained. And get to the point where you get the buy-in from the pilots so that, because you don't really have the contact up front with the visitors, no can, no flight. You want to get to that, like your approach of no can, no climb. Right. Okay, so there you go. So, try and get to that point. And then at the other end, where it's taken out with these villages, is there some way that can, you touched on, is there some economic incentive for them to, deal with it somehow, to manage that waste at the other end? But it seems like with the pristineness of the refuge and the fact that people are going there solely for that, like that's the experience they want to extract, that they can be part of the solution of keeping it that way. And we just need to develop a system, a means, so that they can take their waste out in a reasonable way and have it dealt with at the other end. I think you have some advantages compared to all of us that have had to adapt because we put in toilets and people expect them and all that. Your thin soil above the permafrost is not unlike what we actually deal with in the northern part of the Appalachian Trail. I mentioned yesterday, it's very thin soil over granite. So, pit toilets and cat holdings are really not appropriate. So we develop composting, and in winter, we do have, I didn't mention that yesterday, but in winter in the presidentials on Mount Katahdin, we are moving towards a pack-out recommendation because the snow melts and it's still there, of course. So I'm just wondering if the pilots might be able to be part of this solution, because that seems like your number one way of visitor contact. And, in some ways, it's like we talked about volunteers, but can we enlist them? I don't know how many different, commercial operations there are and all that. And if there's some group that they're part of that you might be able to work with and start and get a few that buy in, get a couple, and it's just like a wave. As you see, eventually, the rest come in line too.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hawk. That gets to a couple of points that I want to bring up. We have so much going for us at Arctic Refuge. The real issue is this unique management style where we don't want to actually interface with our visitors. I shouldn't say don't want to, but we are not currently. And so I have, like I briefly touched on in my talk, put a lot of energy into partnering with our operators, and I feel very lucky that we have very high quality operators, and most of them have a really strong ethic towards stewardship. So they're doing our work for us by offering high level professional services. And one thing that I was really happy for this past year, I want to make a pitch to one particular operator, although we have a number like the woman that you saw on the film, Carol Kaza with Arctic Wild. And we had a first-year operator this year, a guy from Sundog Expeditions, who I think does trips in Idaho. And he was so committed to hauling out waste with his group that he really wanted to work with Arctic Village himself and try to figure out how he could leave the waste there. And I was like, a little sensitive topic there. Why don't you let me handle that? But why don't you tell your operator that you really, really, really want to haul this waste out? And so he did. And he went, I think not the first operator that he talked to, but the second or third finally agreed to it. And so now what's happening is if clients demand it and guides demand it, they're going to start going with the air operators that are willing to haul waste. And so his trip just finished about 3 days before I came on this, on my own travel here, but I'm definitely going to take advantage of that interpretive moment and make sure that starts to build for the refuge.